Hello, everyone. Welcome to Manufacturing Hub, episode 243. This is the show where Dave and I share a lot of our experience in the industrial automation and manufacturing sector. We also talk to various guests from different backgrounds as well as different positions and different industries to hopefully bring you some of the interesting insights in our industry. And so today, the goal is to, as we will introduce the theme in just a moment, to have a conversation part of the larger theme that we like to do in the Manufacturing Hub podcast. And basically, our intent, as I've mentioned, is to educate, but ultimately start with the foundational and then progress into much deeper dives. In other news, Dave and I will be going to prove it as we've mentioned in the previous episodes. So our show is also going live in person in certain events during the year. We have a couple of shows we are committed to, still finalizing a couple of others, but we have Prove It. We will see you at Automate, and we will most likely see you at ICC later in 2026. If you have any questions, we do have a live audience, a live chat on a variety of different platforms. You can find us generally very active on LinkedIn, on YouTube. We also stream to X or Twitter as well as Twitch. So if you're on any of those platforms during the live show, definitely encourage you to ask questions for Dave and I, at least in this episode, or Dave and I and plus or the guest when we do have a guest on. Other than that, make sure if you're tuning in to like, share, and follow. And like I said, leave us a comment, give us maybe some thoughts and ideas for next episodes. I will now pass it on to Dave to introduce the theme that we're kicking off for the next four episodes.
Absolutely. Thanks, Vlad. Hey, everyone. Chat, welcome back to Manufacturing Hub on this beautiful Wednesday afternoon where I think everyone is like 25 degrees below normal January temperatures. Super excited to go ahead and get into the first theme of the year. This month long, we're talking all about technology modernization. And very much along those lines, it's at the trade shows that we go to, at everywhere that we're talking about online, in the boardrooms and the meeting rooms of all of the facilities, we're talking in large part about industrial AI. We are talking to some extent about digital transformation in Industry 4.0, Industry 5.0, all of these other buzzwords and thoughts. But when rubber meets the road, it's not the easiest to actually say Dave would like one AI, Vlad would like two AI, you listeners would all like one AI that you can go ahead and drop into your manufacturing facilities. So this month long, we want to go ahead and dive into those applications. Vlad and I are going to go talk through what that process looks like here on this episode. Next week, we're going to go dive into the hardware side of things. We're going to talk about legacy manufacturers. We're going to talk about new manufacturers. From there, we're going to say we have hopefully created this baseline of we have data. Now, what do we do? Now, what do we do with data? And we're going to go bring on one of my now former end users, talking about some of those solutions, some of the things that have worked, some of the things that haven't worked. We're going to go talk about how do we build a data team. And then what do those solutions and applications look like? And then we're going to go finish with a experimental development group, and we're going to go talk about some of the success stories that they have found, some of the directions that they're seeing early good luck with proofs of concept. So I'm really excited to go ahead and do this, and then I suppose to Vlad's mention, we're going to go finish it at the Prove It conference, in which everyone is going to go quite literally have to prove it. So very excited to go ahead and get into that. I guess, Vlad, before we jump in to the actual theme, we want to do a little bit of background and intro on ourselves for potentially first-time listeners. Now, normally I do that intro, chat. Vlad, would you like to go give that intro?
Let me try and keep it short and sweet for both of us. So Dave and I are both practitioners in the industrial automation and manufacturing spaces. We have done work for large, medium, and small manufacturers. Me leaning a little bit more on the larger side, Dave leaning a little bit more on the medium to smaller side. That being said, we've done projects anywhere from the plant floor, so PLCs, HMIs, all the way through data systems, so SCADA, MES, and ERP integrations, and continue to do this work on a consulting basis for a variety of different stakeholders. Both Dave and I, like I said, continue to consult for a variety of different groups. So if you need any help with automation needs, with manufacturing needs, with assessments, with networks, and everything, like I said, from plant floor all the way to ERP, don't hesitate to reach out.
Oh, that was beautiful, Vlad. Best introduction, best co-introduction,
Good.
perhaps ever on Manufacturing Hub. So going ahead and jumping into some of this
Mhm.
technology modernization, right? So talking about that executive vision, I feel like the executive vision is clear, right? We want artificial intelligence. We want to see what AI can do. We feel like the most perfect, pristine factory. If we close our eyes, it's like that Lego factory in Germany that's running completely lights out, and we put in raw materials and silos on the front side, and we've got these perfect blocks coming out every single time on the back side. It feels like there's a bit of a disconnect between that, perfect German Lego factory and reality. I've never
Yep.
actually seen one of those factories run or continue to run particularly well. And the one or two that you hear about running fairly well are certainly the outliers of these conversations. Let's start by asking the question, Vlad, where do you think the disconnect lies between the reality of the plant floor and this AI vision for the future?
Yeah, and I would start by answering that question within the context of what the AI, quote unquote, is looking to achieve. In my conversations, at least, I noticed that a lot of the executive decisions looking at implementing AI are perhaps not, how would I say it, not foundational enough for the plant floor, but perhaps for other areas of the business. And what I usually mean by that is I would typically start asking the question of what exactly are you trying to solve? What is it that you think your specific organization can benefit from when it comes to some of these tools that maybe you've seen at a trade show or pitched by, an OEM or a SaaS company. And for me, the disconnect, number one, is not understanding what it takes to integrate, again, quote unquote, AI or machine learning or LLMs, if we want to be a little bit more specific, into one part of the business versus another. And what I mean by that usually is I think we should all agree that, in a general sense, AI is very good at writing text better than we could, right? Or it's better to, let's say, completing text than we could. It's better at generating, let's call it, and better, again, I use that a bit loosely because it's obviously subjective, but it is highly capable of generating text. It is highly capable of processing information. It's very good at processing large amounts of information that nobody is capable of remembering, and basically synthesizing something to a certain quality of degree. And so basically the disconnect for me is not understanding which areas that fits or doesn't fit. And so, in my opinion, at least based on the current demos that I have seen from groups that do share this information, of which there are very few, it is very difficult to, number one, actually acquire data that can be processed by the LLMs, right? So I think I'm making a bit of a distinction between machine learning and LLMs. But number two, I think they don't realize what it takes to upgrade the infrastructure in order to make that possible, right? And usually, three is, I guess, the impact that it's going to have, I believe, is still unclear for many groups. So I think it's very difficult to compare to, let's say, a sales organization. We've improved our outreach or capability by, I don't know, 40% ROI using these AI tools. It's not necessarily going to replicate the same way into your plant floor operations. What are your thoughts, Dave?
I think all of those are very good points. As I think about it, I think it generally boils down to we have very imperfect information, right?
Hmm.
And the,
Hmm.
the reason I say that is because for all of the practitioners and technicians and folks that have been in industry for 10 or 20 or more years have all lived through the industry 3.0, we need to go put sensors on the plant floor, to the industry 4.0, we can now connect those sensors to the internet, to the industry now 5.0 of we can take those sensors that have been connected to the internet and connect them to data centers and give us AI tools.
Hmm.
The imperfect information very much exists with the fact that we have still not done a lot of that foundational industry 3.0 solution. And so we don't have that data and we don't have that historical data, right? So I think most practitioners agree upon that. But I think the imperfect information exists from Vlad goes and puts on his executive hat or his plant manager hat or his operations manager hat or his maintenance manager hat or any of those hats of folks actually working within a business. And if the CEO asks Vlad and any of those hats on of are we collecting information, Vlad, as a maintenance manager, operations manager, goes and looks at the stack of paper on his desk and confidently says, Boss, we're absolutely collecting this information, right? I have all of this information. We can go look at it. If CEO asks any of these Vlads what sort of OEE or what our throughput or what our yield looks like, they're going to say, oh, it looks really good. And maybe we take this and maybe this truth gets stretched, or maybe we just say, hey, we're running at 82%, or hey, we're running at 99%, or hey, we're running at 101% because the one encoder that I have is saying that we're running at 101% of the percentages that we should be running at in order to go hit the appropriate yield. Or we see the outcome, and if I need 50 cases and I've made 50 cases, we're like, oh, we're running at 100%, which is not necessarily the truth. But at the
Hmm.
end of the day, we don't have the information that is required in order to go ahead and deliver any sort of data intelligence tool. Having said that, most of the people in those positions are going to full heartedly believe that they have the information. So the executives go and have these conversations about deploying this AI platform and say, hey, this AI platform is $4 million a year baseline because you're buying all of this compute within data centers, etc. And they're like, absolutely, this $4 million of compute is going to go save us or make us 15 or 20 million dollars, and then they go sign the deals and they take the $4 million of compute back to Vlad with all of these hats on, and they look at the information that's going to be needed and they're like, it's going to take us $7 million in 2 years in order to go build up all of the information and all of the sensors and collect this and put it somewhere that is needed in order to go ahead and leverage these tools. So I think at the end of the day, it comes back to imperfect information. As much as some practitioners who might be trying to go deploy industry 3, industry 4 solutions may feel like they're up fighting a brick wall that isn't moving or giving at all. At the end of the day, I think it's imperfect information in which the executives don't think that they need the information, and it hasn't been explained to them in a way that they can be successful in saying, yes, I'm going to invest this money because it is the path to industry 4.0 or digital transformation or now industrial AI.
Yeah, and I would say I see a lot of the same in my conversations with the clients who are looking to deploy AI. I think at the end of the day, it becomes extremely expensive once they start to realize, we assume that we were at least at this stage of, I would say, operational maturity. But in reality, the automation components, right, and data are
Mhm.
usually very difficult to see and to understand with the naked eye. So once you start drilling deep enough and trying to understand what kind of signals are we actually capturing, what's the data flow,
Mhm.
you start to realize, well, at this stage now we also need to change out some of the PLCs, the HMIs, the IPCs. We need to upgrade, to a better networking infrastructure. When you purchase, to your point, compute power that's going to
Mhm.
reside somewhere in the cloud or maybe on prem. You also
Mhm.
need to invest in the hardware and the architecture of your servers. So it becomes extremely, I guess, more expensive than originally anticipated if you were told then, hey, let's just run AI, quote unquote, on the data that we currently have. So there's just a lot of, I think, excitement initially, but once you conduct a proper due diligence and assessment of the current state of the facility, it becomes apparent that it's not going to be quite as easy. And I would say also it requires a lot of specialty knowledge, right? As much as
Mhm.
we like to sometimes skip that component and say that, well, AI can just take the knowledge of those who are looking to retire, it's very, very difficult to just automatically scan, your systems, your documents, your
Mhm.
manuals, and then somehow synthesize all of those layers. So it is very manual in terms of a process to get it up to speed for AI. What do you
Exactly.
think? Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was no. You go ahead. Ask the question, Vlad.
I was going to ask you, what do you think um, what do you think the vision is of what the executives are looking to achieve with AI? Have they communicated maybe in some of your conversations what the picture of the plant floor actually looks like with AI? Is it just yet another Copilot or ChatGPT for the employees, or is it something bigger?
Absolutely. I think that that's a fantastic question. And that is something that is still a bit ambiguous, right? I don't think that the majority of business executives have a vision of this is what I want my plant floor to look like when we are
Hmm.
done with AI. I think that there are some not insignificant pain points that these executives are trying to solve or maybe are being sold on that we can solve. And I think it's those pain points or deliverables that they'd really like that they would like AI to solve. And to get into that, I how do I say it? How do I say this as nice as possible? I think to a not insignificant extent, it's the human aspect of everything, right? So for as long as I can remember, most manufacturing facilities have been trying to hire, right? Depending upon where you are, sometimes there are billboards that are saying, "Hey, we've got a $5,000 signing bonus for this." Depending upon the groups that you work with, I work with several groups in fairly highly industrial areas. And going and hiring someone and training someone, and then that person leaving 6 weeks or 6 months later because the facility down the road is offering $1 more an hour is a shockingly common occurrence
Hmm.
that I have seen over and over again. So I think there's the desire to reduce workforce, and we're reducing workforce in part because it's the capitalization and OPEX cost, but we're also reducing workforce because we are churning some not insignificant portion of our workforce. So we're first and foremost looking to reduce OPEX costs when it comes to workforce, but also reducing the amount of workforce development that we have to do because we are churning 10 or 20% of it. And thirdly, I think that we are looking to be able to go get better data and insights as to if these
Hmm.
groups can legitimately define what these better data insights look like. I don't think so. I think it's really dependent, right? So for lots of groups, and we've talked about OEE over and over again, but if it's a facility that is not measuring OEE, it would not surprise me. And typically, I find somewhere between like 16 and 25 or 35% OEE is where groups are running. So, groups that don't have that data visualization are hoping to go collect that information so they can understand how they're running so that they can put together specific KPIs and initiatives to solve those problems. On
Hmm.
there's a huge middle ground in there of groups that are collecting some of the data and could in theory go solve some um, problems operationally and otherwise, but we'll skip that for the moment and go to like the far side. We've had some guests on talking about doing machine learning and big regression algorithms with the intention of saving like 1/4%, right? So if you're running at 95, 97% OEE, and you have basically no unplanned downtime over the course of the year, a quarter of a percent, a half a percent is a huge savings. A savings where if you make money and you make items in enough volume, could be hundreds of millions of dollars a year's worth of savings, especially if you have the same types and pieces of equipment. So we've had guests on that have talked about those applications where they have run up, multi-million dollar a year groups within groups in order to go after that last half a percent. I think those are what every group hopes is the outcome of the AI revolution, is that they are going after the last quarter or half a percent. I think the majority of groups are on the front end, as we've discussed, of we don't have the data collection, so we're actually running significantly worse than we thought we are. So they're more so going after the OPEX costs and the resourcing costs.
Yeah, and it is an interesting thought. To be honest with you, I have not necessarily asked this question very explicitly during my conversations,
Mm-hmm.
but it's probably something that I should start doing, as the answer in a broader sense always seems to be, well, we have this newly formed AI or digital
Mm-hmm.
transformation team, and this is even outside of manufacturing, right? So
Yeah.
this is not specific to our vertical, who's going to deploy quote unquote AI, collect the data, and then figure out what different stakeholders actually need where we
Mm-hmm.
could apply some of these solutions. And to me, obviously, it is an approach, but it seems to be very dependent on a chain link of ifs,
Yeah.
basically in this case, to succeed. So it's still unclear for me what a lot of the groups are, or I guess have in their mind as far as the ideal state for some of these solutions. And like I said, I have different hypotheses, obviously, on the controls engineering and plant floor sides, but it has never been really like made clear to me on that vision. Let me ask you a follow up. And how do we get to this quote unquote vision, as nebulous as it may be?
Yep. That is a good question. I think that is the $1 billion question that lots of groups are struggling with. I think foundationally, it is a combination of hardware, right? So we need to go collect this data, and we'll go dig briefly into this hardware this week, and we'll go dig much deeper with Benson on hardware next week. And then, so we need hardware, we need to do upgrades, we need to do retrofits, we need to put in IIoT devices. This may be the most divisive portion of the conversation between Dave and Vlad. But we need to go collect this data somewhere on the hardware side. And then from the collecting the data somewhere on the hardware side, we need to go normalize this data. We need to go turn this data into a UNS. We need to go do something to transform this data to a point that there is contextualization so that we can go feed it to our AI and ML models in a way that they generally know what this is, so that they can go hopefully spit out a bunch of absolutely fantastic items that will change and revolutionize how our business goes. In reality, we'll go do some of this work. We'll feed them some information. We'll go do a bunch of additional work. They'll feed us back some information, and it will just be kind of a chain link of events up to the point of, hey, we know what we know with this data. Now we need more data. Please go feed us operational data. Please go feed us all of this other information so that we can go continue to grow and build our models to be successful. Do you want to dive maybe a little bit in on the hardware side and kind of some of our early thoughts re-hardware, Vlad?
Yeah, and let me maybe take a quick step back, right? So
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, why is hardware important? And I will make the comment that in a general sense, there hasn't been a whole lot of, I would say, major changes from a hardware standpoint in the manufacturing industry, maybe from like a signal standpoint, right? So we're still connecting digital data. We're still collecting analog signals. We have a couple of perhaps newer, new-ish protocols that have made their ways onto the plant floors. But usually you start with assessing those systems. And the reason why you do that is because you need to have a baseline of how you're going to collect that information. And I have personally never been to a facility that had a very good as built or the current state of their control systems. And usually, what that means is they will typically have a log from when some of the work has been done. They will generally understand the physical assets, right? So they can point you to here's line two, here's filler, 36, here's this specific process, but they don't always know what's inside of the machines. And that usually is what matters when it comes to collecting plant floor data. And upon those assessments, again, at least in my opinion, and it of course depends on the industry, when the facility was built, how much money was invested into basically correcting some of these issues, you will find that there's going to be a lot of legacy hardware. And for context, for those that maybe know the industrial space a little bit less, legacy means simply hardware that was there many, many years, if not decades ago, and simply is no longer supported by the OEMs, utilizes protocols that are very difficult to work with. And so, why do we care about the hardware? Is ultimately because you can invest the money and the time to retrofit some of that hardware to a newer platform, which then makes it a lot easier to pull data from, versus you can leave it on the legacy side, and there's going to be protocol translators, there's going to be additional hardware that you can sort of like add to the control system, but it will be usually more expensive to go that route than in some cases, like I said, upgrade. And so that's the reason why. And I think it's important to understand this why. And if you haven't been to plant floors, opening the actual industrial panels and looking at manufacturing lines, I think it's sometimes underappreciated as to why we should spend, in certain cases, millions of dollars just to change from an old controller to quote unquote a new controller, right? But there is a reason why we're doing that. So going back to how do we get to this vision, like I said, it all starts for me at least with an assessment. I've met very few groups that have a good inventory of their assets. The second step is usually doing research or due diligence on what should be prioritized and what can be left as is, right? So creating some kind of a strategical roadmap for that specific manufacturer on where the priority is. And this also, I want to make that side note, doesn't only involve hardware. In many of my conversations, it could be, well, we're running this specific SKU on these three lines. That is the SKU that is bottlenecking our sales. We're running a completely different SKU on these remainder 5 lines that are a bit newer. So, of course, you're going to prioritize the SKU that is more important for the manufacturer. So there's going to be also some operational considerations as to why we choose specific areas to invest in. But ultimately, we understand what needs to be prioritized. And to be quite honest, it is a very tedious then process of traditional systems integration. In some cases, you can migrate relatively easily if it's especially sticking maybe with the same manufacturer, but in my experience it does require some further analysis of the system. And I'll give you one example, right, Dave? So if you're looking to migrate maybe from a PLC 5 or even a Slick 505 into the control logics or compact logics platform on the Allen Bradley side, in some instances you can just port the program and it's going to convert using the Rockwell tool. In other instances, you're going to realize you have a ton of different dependencies, and unless you know how to deal with those dependencies, you're going to spend basically months trying to figure out, well, this specific servo drive needs to be upgraded. We need to eliminate DeviceNet, that is a legacy protocol. So there's going to be a lot of different steps that we need to take care of before we can move from one hardware solution to another. And of course, if you're going cross-platform for, again, maybe standardization or a corporate directive, that's a whole other issue. But that's a whole other, I think, conversation on how that is done. It is a very lengthy topic to discuss. What are your thoughts on the hardware side, Dave?
Absolutely no. I would agree with that, Vlad, and I want to come back because I feel like you're on a roll, and you have certainly done more thousands of hours in the last couple of years going and figuring out how we upgrade these entire control systems and retrofits, right? And that is one direction that a group could go.
Mhm.
And honestly, if they are looking to manufacture for the extended future, going and retrofitting 20 or 30-year-old lines is a direction that they should legitimately look at.
Mhm.
Having said that, there is another direction that we could look at on hardware of saying, hey, I have some, maybe it's PLC 5s, right? Maybe they're 20 plus years old.
Yep.
Maybe they're Slick 505s, which are still 20 years old. But perhaps I have purchased some machines, and the machines are 5 years old, are 10 years old, right? The controls are okay. We can run the controls.
Mhm.
But for a variety of reasons, maybe the systems are locked down. I can't get data out of them. Or maybe it's we have just enough data to be able to go run this machine, but I don't have enough data to be able to go fill into my other systems in order to be able to be successful to go through the process of feeding it to these data tools or to this AI style tool. Then this is where I think the conversation might get a little divisive. But what are your thoughts and recommendations for that?
Well, look, I think you should in general start with the business case, right? Because you can have a system where you're collecting every single data point at the lowest resolution or the highest resolution, depending if we're talking about frequency from that machine. Similarly, you can be collecting just a very high level. Let's say state of the machine, right? If you're looking if it's running, if it's stopped, if it's faulted, so and everything in between. So I think there are going to be trade-offs and there's going to be considerations but also constraints and how that is implemented with obvious, I would say, results or potential results at the end. And obviously, this is something that will require some testing to figure out. But if you throw in just the state of your machine over, let's say, a period of a month into an LLM, how much more, or I guess, how much less accurate is it going to be if it has the information of every single, stop and fault code it has been over the last month, and how much more accurate would it be if you were to provide it the state of every single encoder that you have on that line? I the short answer is it's very difficult to say. It's going to be on a case by case basis. What I generally recommend is that you start as small as you possibly can for your business case, but you also leave room for improvement, right? And there's going to be some obvious bottlenecks. There's going to be, for example, questions of how powerful of a on-prem server or maybe how big of a cloud provisioned VM do we purchase? But there's going to be also less obvious questions and, I would say, like, situations that will lead to maybe different platform selection for your control system. Or if you have an existing one, like you've mentioned, for this specific scenario, maybe whatever lies on top of it in terms of SCADA, Historian, or MES. So there's going to be a lot of different conversations. I don't think it's possible to answer any of this in one fell swoop, but in a general sense, I would say make sure that the business case is as clear as possible and make sure that you're looking at options that allow you to grow within, next 3 to 5 years, because potentially as you go through these initiatives, you will encounter the need to add more data points, add or collect at a higher resolution, and you don't want to be stuck with what you've currently selected. How would you approach this, Dave? I'm curious why you think this would be so divisive.
Well, but because I know you, Vlad, are very much a fan of taking sensors and running sensors into controllers, and then the data from the sensors to the controllers into your OPC or your MQTT servers
Yes.
brokers. And I am more of a fan of. I would love to do that, but the reality of my life is sometimes I'm not going to go touch the PLC because I don't want to be the last person to touch the PLC. And when there's the undoubtable reoccurring issue within the facility, I, the last person who touched the PLC, am the problem. And sometimes going and adding additional layers and systems to go collect those specific pieces of data are a much more economical or a much more possible role as opposed to going and trying to run everything through the existing system. Having said that, and I want to get a little bit deeper into that, but we've got a comment from Phil. Good morning, Phil. Thanks so much for joining us, buddy. Phil says the asset owner sometimes doesn't want the hassle of upgrading because they feel the current system will do until they leave. Someone else is someone else's problem. So sad but true. It depends upon the value of data, and if there's budget, they should plan for upgrades rather than letting the value get lost over time. Uh, I
Yeah, I
completely agree.
mhm. I
Upgrades
was gonna
are
make a comment. I'll let
go
you start.
you go ahead, Vlad. You go ahead.
So what I will say is that I've never had a project that hinged purely on we're going to just upgrade the system, right? So you always need to our earlier conversation, justify some sort of an ROI, and usually that's going to be either bottleneck elimination, so increasing the productivity of the specific line, the facility. It could be elimination of certain operational constraints, right? So it could be having, let's say, three operators on the line instead of five, but you need to have some kind of a tangible proof that your quote unquote machine upgrade is going to yield financial results beyond just moving from one PLC to another. I
Mhm.
don't believe that there's going to be groups that will successfully sell projects within that context.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think that there needs to be some tangible proof. And I think Phil is more so saying
Mhm.
working with a maintenance manager. I've worked with a bunch of, especially folks who are fairly close to retirement and ask the question something to the effect of, will it last 3 more years, or will it last 5 more years, or will it last 10 more years? And if the answer is probably, they say something to the effect of, awesome, then it's not my problem. I don't have to worry about it. The next person in can go worry about that problem. And so that has certainly been something that I have dealt with in my career. Vlad, I think you brought up a really great comment, re-resolution, and I want to briefly touch on the we've got new manufacturing being built, right? Um, I mean, we always have new manufacturing being built. I find that lots of times, especially newer groups, they are not, they don't have the technology debt, right? They don't have 50-year-old machines and 30-year-old PLCs, so they don't have to worry about that. But more often than not, they also don't have the experience that comes along with having upgraded the 50-year-old machines and the 30-year-old PLCs. And so we don't know those things, such as going and getting as much resolution as possible and going and probably putting on more sensors than collecting more data than we ever could thought that we possibly need, right? Like at some point it's the we should collect everything. For probably 10 years I've been saying a hard drive space is cheap. I suppose it's now a lot more expensive than it was just 6 months ago, but still hard drive space is cheap comparative to the value that that data brings. So, do you have thoughts on new manufacturers and what they should look at and do when they bring in new pieces of equipment and technology?
Yeah, it's obviously a very difficult question to answer, right? And I will
Mhm.
start by saying that depending on the group, they may or may not have selection of platforms that they can
Mhm.
bring into their facility, depending on the industry. And again, this is based on my experience. You sort of need to integrate whatever hits the plant floor, and you can't always dictate the platform that you would like based on the machine builders, again, capabilities. If you are able to have that selection and you're able to basically have full say on what's going to be on the plant floor, again, I would start with number one, a business case, right? If this is a large manufacturer and has a lot of funds and has very healthy margins of their business, they can probably pay a little bit more than a small manufacturer looking to open their second facility. So your sort of like costs and your capability of purchasing those seemingly more expensive hard drives is going to be vastly different depending on the scale of the facility. From a more technical standpoint, and actually from a technical standpoint, but rather the other important consideration is how data savvy is your team, right? And the reason I say that is because I've done, again, a lot of assessments. And to be honest with you, Dave, from the first few conversations with the plant team, which includes usually the plant manager, the engineering maintenance managers, I could typically tell how good they would be at using data that would be provided to them, right? And to expand that a little bit further, it generally means that a team that is very continuous improvement focused and understands sort of the lean six sigma tools but lacks the data is going to be much more successful in my experience than a team that is simply, again, disinterested, or maybe to Phil's point, looking to retire or looking to just build another replica of an existing facility, right? So that's kind of where I start a lot of these conversations, trying to understand the team, trying to understand the appetite for creating this new quote unquote greenfield facility. And then as we dive into the tech, it opens obviously different options on what they should and shouldn't do. Again, you can have anything from we're just collecting high level and we're sending a report on the OE status to upper management so they can, for example, compare the different sites. Personally, I've run into a lot of different engineering challenges for which I lacked the data or had to spend a lot of hours just plugged in with my physical laptop and trending the data, that I have gained an appreciation of what can be done with a reliable source of historical information. Again, that this is not even talking about AI or ML or any of those things, but just the ability to see not only that we've stopped at a certain point in time, but that we have the fault code and we have a proper fault code, which is again could be a very long conversation, but we have a long set of descriptions on what happened within the facility, and then you can make decisions, you can better the facility. So I would say, to answer your question more directly, I would create an architecture that allows for, I would say, most of your data to be captured without necessarily capturing all of it. I would be selective within, again, the constraints of your capacity to build VMs, to store a lot of it on prem, to maybe store some of it on the centralized location in the cloud. So there would be some questions, but like I said, if I can store all of the data, I would like to store all of the data. But obviously, it is not practical. You'd have to define rules, maybe when it's rejected, what kind of data is rejected, right? What do you want to keep for how long, so on and so forth. How would you
Absolutely
approach
not.
this? I'm curious.
I think those are all really good points.
Hmm.
I think those are all really good points, especially on the data side. One thing for me, and I've had 24 conversations with groups who are somewhere in the process of considering, of putting together a new facility, of between the considering and the, hey, we have picked a place and we have committed our X number of hundreds of millions of dollars to this project.
Hmm.
And for me, it seems like lots of times they're putting the cart before the horse on these larger projects where we don't have someone who's been in operational, who's been on the operation side of any sort, kind of leading this. And like I'll give you a couple of examples. So I've had probably 4 conversations in the last 6 months of groups who are like, "Hey, we're going to go make this widget. And as part
Hmm.
of this widget, we are building a building in this area because it's next to our other facility or because it's close to somewhere that we have. And we've already committed to the building footprint. And we know we need X number of injection molding machines, or we know we need X number of press machines or other things along those lines, but we don't know which ones they are. We don't necessarily know what size they are. We don't have any amount of knowledge of what conveyance is going to look like, or robotics is going to look like, or overhead cranes, or any of these other things are going to look like. But we've already committed to the footprint of this building. And every single time I ask them, is there a plan of how we're going to do this? Are we going to have conveyance? I once had a group that told me that they were buying like 75 machines because they knew they needed these 75 machines. And these 75 machines all fit within 20,000 square feet. And I'm like, is there room to walk in and amongst this 20,000 square feet? Is there conveyance? Like, how are we moving these things from one place to the other? Lots of times we look at kind of the numbers and how much space those would fit in. As a person who has gone and watched his perfect facility layout die when I had a machine, or when a building post was put in the middle of my track, or when the building post was put in the middle of where my machine was supposed to be, I can say a lot of it is a little bit of extra work on the pre-work side, and going and thinking about what these processes are going to look like, and going and thinking about what a potential automated version of these processes are going to look like as that first step. And then while you're doing that, and while you're doing the machine selection, if it's an injection molding machine, or if it's a press machine, or if it's a filler machine, going to your point, Vlad, of making sure that you can collect that data. And sometimes the answer is yes. Lots of times the answer is yes, if you pay us some additional money. Sometimes it's the yes, but we need to upgrade the controller to whatever this is so that we can go add a module. I see that a lot, especially on scales. But
Yep.
if you don't ask those questions ahead of time, you end up getting that scale or that controller or that other piece that they can't or won't allow you to go collect the data. And so you're just sitting here like, I really need this data, but it's impossible to get without a controller upgrade that's worth half of the cost of the machine. Or you go back to that crazy conversation of, now do I add a whole bunch of other sensors so that I can have a second set of data so that I can then go feed it in?
Yeah, and look, this is a perfect example, and I would, I guess, like dare say to some extent, a parallel to this IT OT divide, right? Where you
Mhm.
just don't bring in the right person at the right time for that conversation so they can ask some of those questions, right? And at least get feedback that, hey, this equipment is going to come in without any capability. Can we make the purchase of the additional card, which cannot be installed unless purchased
Mm-hmm.
beforehand? And so it is definitely something that I have seen several groups fall into as a trap. I would say for me, a lot of the projects are a little bit further along to the point that the state of the industrial sort of like engineering is a little bit more known. So for me, I would be extremely not necessarily stressed, right? But I like to generally over prepare and ask questions, and I spent a lot of time with directors of engineering just whiteboarding what the general layout of the plant would be, while they know and they have the answers of the type of equipment they have purchased,
Mm-hmm.
so we can generally understand what is possible, what they need to pay a little bit more for. Again, what does the migration look like? I've done projects as far back as for PNG retrofitting machines from very specific machine builders that would simply and flat out refuse to use a specific platform of choice, and you're left with nothing but gutting the entire
Mm-hmm.
control system and basically re-engineering a piece of equipment that is now worth 10 times its price, because we want to
Mm-hmm.
be able to integrate with the current plant infrastructure. But I think it's a super interesting example. I'm assuming that to some extent you have to roll with the punches,
Yeah.
so to speak, and you do have to have some flexibility. But again, spending less time on that preparation phase to me just immediately says we're probably going to experience a lot of engineering change orders as the project progresses. And sometimes you have influence over that, and sometimes you just have to do your best and figure out what can be, I guess, done in the field.
I once, Vlad, was an applications engineer on a project that I called the on-site project manager the day that we kicked off because I needed some information for the next project that we were quoting for him, right?
Hmm.
And I pick up a phone to a really, really stressed guy who said something to the effect of, the project just started today, which was like 2 hours, like two business hours before, and we're already 8 weeks behind. And I'm like, how are we 8 weeks behind on a project that started this morning? I never got a good answer. The project took, well, I mean, the projects always take an extra 8 weeks. let's go transition off of
Hmm.
the how do we collect the data and what are the things to go look at collecting the data and what are our hardware options to go transition the data into we have the data and now what. So Vlad, let's go put
Yeah.
engineering director, operation director, VP of one of these. You have a plant, the plant has the data. What do we do with it?
Yeah, so look, so for me, always the first step, if I walk into to some extent the unknown,
Mm-hmm.
I would always want to get a baseline on the OE metrics. And I think in our space, there's obviously some debates on the usefulness of OE, but I think again they can be reliably used as a baseline to understand the general state of assets. And typically that's why I always recommend manufacturers, well, if you're unable to figure out your OE even via a whiteboard, it is a good place to start as a baseline metric. So for me, I'm looking at the OE. I'm trying to assess. Again, I've made this comment a little bit earlier, and prioritize what lines are critical, what areas are critical, and this can be again broken down by area. It could be production, it could be your warehousing, it could be your process sides. Then you start to drill in to the specific lines. So again, coming from the food and bev background, it could be your filler that's the bottleneck. It could be your case backer. It could be your palletizer, et cetera, et cetera. So you're starting to understand where are the problems in your facility. The next
Mm-hmm.
question is, of course, why do we have those bottlenecks? And so again, OEE isn't going to necessarily give you that information, but as you start to understand the state of your assets, you can, like as an example, if you have a case packing machine, just maybe someone can relate much easier, you need to load the empty cases on one side, and then it's going to basically form the case. It's going to put the bottles in. It's going to glue the case. Could be shrink wrapped, again, different on the applications, but you need to have the raw materials in. So the question for me, if that machine is low on the OE side, is it because the operator hasn't loaded the raw materials, in which case are the case as well as maybe the glue mechanism, or is it because the machine is constantly stopping because it hasn't been maintained or lubricated, or is it an issue with the control system, right? Maybe we're getting a misfire at the end of that specific machine that's causing it to fault out, or maybe we simply don't know because the operator presses the stop push button and our number of stops, well, the most critical stop is stop push button, and that's the only stop we see inside of our sort of pseudo SCADA slash MES solution. So I think that's the general starting point. And then we can obviously take that a lot further. You can start looking at the historical information. You can start, for example, having been trained on some of the CI tools. You can have a lot better visibility into your daily stand-up shifts, and you can present the information. Well, if you own the packaging side or you own the process side, here are the top three conditions you should be focused on, right? And so there's going to be a lot of, I would say, like different applications of quote unquote data that we've
Mm-hmm.
extracted. I do want to hear, I guess, like what you have to say as well, because, like I said, I can talk about this for hours.
Absolutely. No, I think that from your perspective, it's really interesting,
Mhm.
and I have gone down that path, right? So like I have gone down those OEE paths, and we've done the
Yep.
stand up meetings, and we've talked about what this means, and then everyone leaves in order to go dig into the information, and then we solve the problem that we are trying to solve 3 weeks later after we've lost $5 million of throughput, right? I
Mhm.
feel like that is the standard process that lots of these facilities go through. I guess on my side, if I was given the task of collect the data, which let's say we've done, now go and feed this data into one of these AI platforms or help us
Mm.
find or create an AI platform or AI agents and AI tools in order to go deliver some of these results. I feel like there's a team that would, or probably two teams that would be needed, right? So we would need the team on site in order to help contextualize this information, to do a bunch of that manual work, probably work with the on-site SMEs. So once we've standardized the data, and we probably pick 10 points, 500 points, 10,000 points to begin with, depending upon what we have. And then we've got the team who's working on taking that specific information and transitioning it to the I'm just going to call them AI tools, internal, external AI tools that we are using in order to go build that knowledge so that we can go deliver some of these results. And I
Mhm.
think that that team is probably the data science team that has the contextualized information. And we are going and exploring several different directions that we can go ahead and look. I feel like most projects are to the point of we're feeding this in and then seeing what it comes up with. Now, if it was me
Mhm.
particularly and specifically, I'd be very interested in throughput of the machines. If we have that, I'd be really interested in scrap at a lot of these materials or at scrap at a lot of these facilities. I'd specifically be interested in raw material input versus what our outcome throughput looks like, and if those numbers match up to what our yield percentage in theory should. As if it does or not are completely different questions, but that is where I would start at the majority of these, and then I would look at going and identifying the internal constraints and going and looking at optimizing on the internal constraints. So if it's a food and beverage facility, if it's any facility that has a filler, your design constraint should be the filler. It in theory might not, but your design constraint could and should be the filler. And so going and looking at that and leveraging the tools and technology I have in relation to how do we optimize our design constraints so that we can increase throughput and reduce all of the other issues is where I would typically start. I think there's also the opportunity of blank slate all of these AI tools out there going and doing a big deep dive into what are all of these tools that exist, what are our opportunities to go ahead and leverage some of these other tools in ways and process optimizations and worker optimizations and worker empowerment and all of those other directions that we briefly touched on at the beginning of the conversation.
That should be a, I was thinking about the comment on the filler side, should be a trivia question or maybe an interview question for anyone looking to work in food and bev and claims to have a data or experience on the plant floor as to why usually the filler is the constraint or the bottleneck.
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is obviously because it's the machine that converts your process side
Yeah.
into your discrete packaging side. But unless you've worked with fillers and food and bev, it's not something I would expect someone to know. But it's also common in pharma and a few other industries that have that transition, right? If you go to automotive, everything is pretty much discrete. Um, no, I look. I My question for you, Dave, would be: is the state that I've described is more traditional, I would say,
Mm-hmm.
integration and sort of like SCADA and MES deployments. Are you suggesting that in this case you would basically skip that step and just pipe the data from the plant floor into a database that then can be accessed through AI, and then you can maybe feed the responses from AI into similar but perhaps better insights on similar fronts? Or would you still implement your more traditional SCADA and MES?
So I suppose on my side, I am talking about facilities that already have that they already have their morning meetings set up, right? Like they already
Mhm.
have their morning meeting set up. They
Okay.
generally know how they're doing and what they're supposed to do. As to if they have any of the MES information is a completely and how valid that data is a completely different
Mhm.
conversation than it is a completely different conversation. We should not get into should not get into that. Having
Yeah.
said that, if I'm looking to go deploy AI tools, I'm not going to stop and do the expensive, time consuming intermediate step of going and building a SCADA or going and building an MES. I mean, at the end of the day, if I have the raw production data and I give those metrics to my AI tools, I should be able to easily go ahead and extrapolate what my MES is, right? So like on
It
your
should be is a
OEE,
dangerous statement, but yes, should
you're right,
should.
it should be, but like on your OEE, your availability, your performance, your quality, your three metrics to go give you OEE. We could
Hmm.
go build that into an MES. We could go and build that out of a process historian. Lots of process historians, like, they're super powerful tools, right? Like, we can go ahead and deploy our APQs from what our process historian is saying. I mean, honestly, man, we could go build a Power BI dashboard that is touching one of our SQL databases or is piped into one of our process historians, and go ahead and pull our APQ over a period of time and do that multiplication in any of these tools. Having
Yeah,
said that, if we are going from the we don't have data, or we need more data, and we are going into the AI journey, maybe an intermediary step is our AI. We've built a couple of dashboards. We can now see what OEE looks like. I would not take the extended step in this fictional, we have unlimited money to go play around with AI. I would not take the fictional step of stopping to go build a standalone MES solution in order to go ahead
interesting.
and deliver that. Having said that, like, there are lots of facilities that are not going to go spend $5 million a year or more in order to go attempt to hit this AI solution. And going and having MES data and information is more than enough to is more than enough to go get the information that we need. We'll see in 3 to 5 years as to how much value the majors are getting out of a lot of this AI data, and if that's the direction they're going, or otherwise. In my experience, most of the groups that I have worked with that are buying these AI platforms are groups that already have done your SCADA, have already done your MES, are looking for those extended process insights.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting. There is a note on the volume side. Let me just double check as I unmute this side. It looks like the volume is coming through for me. So the comment that was made, please double check LinkedIn on your side. Dave, I would say like the comment to come back to our conversation that I will make is for me, again, having spent many years getting data out of your controllers, I would have a lot of questions what the basically what that looks like at the granular level to send sort of like plant floor data into some of these LLMs. And it could be as basic as, do you need timestamps? Do you need purely start and stop signals? Are you looking to create some kind of a textual representation of what the stops actually mean? So I would have a lot of, to be honest with you, questions. And perhaps it is a question that some of the groups working on these AI solutions could answer for us this year. But again, I would be really curious to hear some of the architectural decisions as you deploy AI and consume that information again, maybe in its raw form from PLCs, maybe in its synthesized form from SCADA historians, MES, and again, what kind of results you're expecting to get at some of those different levels. But like I said, I don't see a potential to just skip those steps for facilities that don't have them. Naturally, if they have them, again, then it becomes a question of which data do you consume? Is it all of it? Is it some of it? And obviously, what yields the most ROI? Because again, all of these operations are going to be costly, and you can throw all of the data at the LLMs, but you will be paying quite a bit more. And so I don't know. I don't have the answer as to what is more beneficial or less.
Absolutely. Vlad, we have somehow, to the surprise of no one, filled more than an hour talking about the technology modernization. Any
Mhm.
last thoughts on your side of takeaways that people should have, things that they should keep in mind as we finish kicking off this technology modernization and manufacturing theme?
I would say for me, the biggest takeaway and a point that I keep hammering with almost everyone that I have this conversation with is take the time to understand your current architecture. I cannot stress enough how difficult it is to come in as I guess an outside contractor or consultant, and not have the most basic of answers on that
Mhm.
front. I think it basically costs you a lot more money not having done some of that audit on your own and having a good inventory of your systems. And ultimately, this leads not only to that specific engagement and a data engagement, but also leads to a better understanding of where your assets are, what kind of vulnerabilities you may have, what kind of attack vectors you may experience from the outside. So do not skip and again, it obviously how often you should be doing this depends on the organization and the team, but ultimately try to keep as good of an inventory, not only the physical assets, but also your control systems, networks, so on and so forth.
Absolutely. No, I think that that's fantastic. On my side, I would say, as we've talked about the entire conversation, data, right? Having data, having history of that data, having that clear and contextualized is important. So if you are going down the process of collecting the data for a specific AI initiative now, if you're going down the process of collecting data for an MES or process historian um, or other projects now or in the near future, having that data with appropriate resolutions and appropriate contextualizations and doing that as you're going through collecting it will be much easier, much less painful, and much less expensive
Mhm.
now than trying to pay data scientists to do it at some point in the future.
Awesome.
Having said that, Vlad, this has been an awesome conversation. Everyone, thank you so much for joining in on chat. We've had several of you guys comment and say hi. Phil, thanks so much, especially for your comments. If you guys are new here, please make sure you're following Vlad. Please make sure you're following myself and Manufacturing Hub. We have these awesome conversations every week. This month, all month long, well, for the next 4 weeks, we're talking about technology modernization in manufacturing. Next week, we're going to dive into the hardware side. The week after that, we're going to dive into the data side and going and building a data team. And then we're going to go talk about projects and applications as practical as humanly possible, and as many as exist on how do we go do the technology modernization to get to the AI side. If you're watching on LinkedIn, again, please follow Manufacturing Hub and Vlad and myself. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit the like button. Please hit the subscribe button. We've cracked 1,000 subscribers, which is awesome, because it means you guys are watching. And then if you guys are following along on podcast format, you're also awesome. Please rate us 5 stars and follow along and do the like and share and subscribe thing. Until next week, we'll see everyone soon. Thank you.